Yeah, I guess why is it, or how do you know that God exists?
Okay. All right. So are you coming from the perspective of an atheist or agnostic?
Yeah, I was raised Christian, and then I deconverted when
Mhm.
I was 13. So currently, I'm an atheist, agnostic. I'm going to be 30 soon.
Okay. All right. Okay. And the reason why I would believe in God, I think there's numerous reasons. One key reason would be the universe itself being evidence of a creator for it. We know that
Okay.
things do not arise by themselves, and since the universe had a beginning and cause and effect is true, therefore the universe would need to have a prior cause or creator to bring it into existence. So that's one reason. There's other reasons, such as like how complex the universe is, indicating a designer. There's reasons of morality. The fact that we know there's certain things that are objectively right and wrong would imply an objective moral lawgiver. And in the absence of an objective moral lawgiver, that would mean there's no morality, no objective morality. But I think we know there are things that are truly right and wrong.
Okay. I've heard both of these points before, and I find them both
Well, there's
interesting.
three of them. There are three
Oh,
of them.
sorry. The moral lawgiver, creation of the universe. What was the other one? Sorry.
So there's the origin of the universe.
Okay.
That's one argument. But then the complexity of the universe, the
Okay.
designness of it, is a second and
I see.
separate argument to the origin of the universe.
Okay. Um, I feel like though that all of these things have been continuously explained by science, and so I don't see where that necessitates a God existing.
What do you think in science has explained away, say, the origin of the universe?
No, I don't think it's explained away the origin of the universe. I think it's a
Okay.
continuously researched question, right? And so, what we found is that we often approach things that we don't understand, and it's a part of the whole framework of science to continuously learn and understand new things. There was a 200
Sure.
year old maths problem that was solved, for example, last month by a mathematician in Sydney University. So there's always things being that we don't understand that we try and understand more of, and I think the origin of
Yeah.
the universe is one of those things.
Okay. But I'm not arguing from what we don't know. I'm actually arguing from what we do know. We know the
Okay.
universe had a beginning, and we know that anything with a beginning needs something to cause it to begin, needs a prior cause.
Okay.
So, therefore, the conclusion to that argument that necessarily follows is that the universe has a prior cause to bring into existence.
Yeah. Okay. So I think this is where you run into a bit of parallel lines because I don't think we know that the universe had a beginning, right? We know that there was the Big Bang, but we don't know that that was the beginning of the universe per se. And then if space time is,
Well, I think
can
there
be.
are
Go
reasons
ahead.
why. I think there are reasons definitely why the universe had a beginning. So, even like the second law of thermodynamics, stating that
Hmm.
everything left to itself tends towards more disorder. If the
Sure.
universe was infinitely old, we would have reached a stage of infinite disorder. We haven't, which showed that the universe had a beginning in the finite past.
Right. But there's also theories of cosmology, right? That the it kind of bounds back and forth, right? Like there's a
You're
big
talking
bang,
about
and
like the crunch.
yeah, and it'll crunch
Wait,
back, and then there'll be another big bang, things like that, and we wouldn't be able to see beyond that, right? If that's in that framework. And the other thing too
the
is if go ahead, sorry.
I was going to say that that idea goes against what we know even through our scientific observation. We know through the red shift that the universe is expanding, and we've figured it out that actually the universe is expanding faster as time goes on,
Yeah.
not slower. Which you would expect if it was going to come in for a big crunch, the universe should be slowing down to come back in for a crunch. It's going out faster and faster, expanding faster, which goes against the idea of a big crunch, and so that's why that idea is not even really held today in modern cosmology because it goes against the scientific evidence. But
Okay.
what we do know establishes the origin of the universe. Time and space and matter came into existence. Therefore, you need a prior cause for that. Like the most reasonable thing is that there's something beyond space and time that made it. Would you agree with that?
I guess that's another, and I'm sorry to do kind of like a Mott and Bailey here, but I don't know that I agree with that either, because my understanding too is, let's say, okay, it doesn't, the universe isn't like this kind of spiral, right? It big bangs and then it expands and then it crunches again or something like that. Let's say there was just a finite past and origin as we might think. If space and time came into being at that point of the Big Bang, then time would also have started then, right? So it would seem illogical that there's such a thing as before time. I've heard an analogy like what's north of the North Pole, right?
That's more semantic. That's more just semantics, though. So when I say before, I'm not talking about in terms of temporal before. I'm
Okay.
talking about causally prior, causally before, not temporally before. Because obviously you can only use, if you're speaking in regards to time, it doesn't make sense. But you can still, something can be causally prior to another and yet still be simultaneous in respect to time. But also, we actually have in the chat Dr. John Kroom. He's an astrophysicist.
Okay.
I'm sorry he left a comment just before. I've had interviewed him before. He says the cyclical universe was debunked by scientists multiple times. He's grasping at straws and is uninformed. So this is helpful because we actually have a scientist, astrophysicist in the
Sure.
chat who can actually speak on this. He studied this sort of things.
Yeah, I'm not I'm not a scientist or a cosmologist, right? So if that theory's been debunked, then fine by me. I was under the impression that modern science doesn't have a concrete answer that the universe had like a beginning per se, right? That's not necessarily, like, we know that the Big Bang happened, but I didn't know that there was a consensus among scientists that this was the beginning of the universe. But if that's the case now, then I'm
Yeah.
happy to accept that.
Yeah, that is. They used to think maybe a steady state model back in the 1800s and things like that, but that's been long disproven because of these different things that we've discovered. Microwave background radiation, the red shift, we've got the second law of thermodynamics, and other reasons. So then, do you see how this results in there needing to be a cause to the origin of the universe?
No, because I don't accept that, or I guess I don't understand what you meant earlier about there being a cause that's not based on time, but a cause that's based on something else. I wouldn't understand. I'd ask you to explain that a bit more, perhaps.
So causes aren't necessarily based on time. It's just that something can be causally prior to something, as in one is the cause of the effect, but yet in respect to time, they can seem to be simultaneous, because if the cause of the universe exists beyond time.
Well,
Do you see
can you
that?
think? Yeah, but can you give me an example of something that's causal but not before something, other than what you're proposing?
Well, just anything that's beyond time. Anything that exists beyond space and time, the category of time doesn't relate to it then. It's not like it's bound by time. If the thing that this being created is beyond the thing that he created, you don't limit him or the being by the thing that he created.
And
Like an
yeah,
analogy maybe, if a person was to build a building, you wouldn't say that the building or the pole of a building is the builder. The builder must be separate and be existing beyond the building itself. And so the cause or creator of the universe must be existing beyond the universe itself, so therefore not limited by things like time.
okay. But I still don't think that answers the
So,
question of
because
yeah, you could have
because I
something
think the
not
most
before
reasonable
it.
thing, well, because I think you're saying something can't be before. I'm saying yes, something can be causally. You'd have to show me why something can't be causally prior to another, but yet still exists beyond time.
Okay, well,
There's no
I
way.
guess
There's no reason
yeah.
for say that. But to
I
me, let me
Go ahead, yeah.
let me mention this, that I think the fact that you hear this, you hear the arguments are sound, the scientific evidence actually supports what we're saying, but you're still not wanting to affirm at least even a cause for the universe, to me makes me think you really don't want there to be some sort of God,
No,
because
that's
you don't
yeah,
do the
no,
same thing about other things. Like if you're presented evidence for, I don't know, even something simple of, does someone have a dog? And you're like, hey, this is all the evidence we have, this person has a dog. And you're just like ultra skeptical. Hey, look, that video footage is not real. All the people talking about that person having a dog, that's all fake. You can be ultra skeptical of anything, but that's just
Sure.
unreasonably so. And in a way, I think that's what you're trying to do with God. The evidence clearly points to the existence of a cause or a creator of the universe, but you're like, I don't want that. And so I'm going to try and make a philosophical argument to say that we don't need a cause for the universe, but in that itself, that argument's not sound.
Yeah, let me
See?
stop you. So I would love to have a relationship with Jesus. If there was such a thing as a divine protector and creator, I would love that, and I would gladly accept it with open arms. I just can't accept it. It's not that I'm
Why
not,
not?
because, well, you still haven't demonstrated to me how something can cause something um, not
But
before it,
I don't
right?
need to demonstrate. I don't need to demonstrate that.
Why
I don't
not?
need to demonstrate that. You're making the argument, because you're the one making the argument, that there cannot be a cause because time is not relevant or time doesn't exist prior to the universe. That's
That's
your
not what I
argument.
said. I said there cannot be a cause. Um, Time and space started with the Big Bang, right? I'm asking how could there be something before time? It seems nonsensical to me.
Why is it nonsense? Can you give a reason why something can't be causally prior to space and time? Because
Well,
you'd have to give evidence to say that.
yeah, everything we observe in the universe has been caused prior, right? It's something prior to something causes it. So if
But
there's
that still doesn't
right,
prove that something can't be pr- outside of
well,
space and time. Do you see how that's an
okay,
illogical argument to say just
it
because you haven't observed this, therefore this can't happen some other way? That doesn't
well,
logically follow.
and then I feel then though, just because you're making a proposal doesn't mean that I should accept it without evidence, right? And so just because I can't immediately counteract that argument doesn't mean I should accept it. You know what I mean?
Well,
Like you
you
could say the
should
same
if
thing
you
about
agreed with both premises. If you
I don't.
agreed with both premises that the universe began to exist, which, as we've seen, the scientific evidence actually shows that. Secondly, everything with a beginning has a prior cause. If you agree with both premises, the conclusion to the argument logically and necessarily follows. It's not like it's optional if you want to accept or not. If you want to be a logical person, you must accept the conclusion because it's a sound argument and the premises have been showed to be true. Therefore, you must accept the conclusion if you want to be a rational person. But that's my
Yeah,
point. The fact that you're like, I don't want to accept it, makes me think maybe, maybe you have an ulterior motive in not wanting to accept that there is a God who made the universe.
yeah. I guess we'll just be at parallel lines. I've already told you that I would gladly accept a Jesus if I thought he was real.
No, but
Um,
that's not what I said. You
okay.
may like some of the things within Christianity, like having Jesus. But why people don't like there being a God is the moral accountability. Do you like
You th-
living life the way you want to live?
okay, so if we're changing topics now, what do you mean the way I want to live? Like,
Yeah, just would you prefer to be told you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do that? Particularly
oh, I
maybe on
see what you're
things
saying.
that you really
So,
enjoy doing? Or would you prefer to say, no, I don't want someone to tell me I can and can't do things that I really love doing. I would rather just be able to want to do it. If I want to do it, I should be able to do it.
um, no, I prefer to have rules because I think it's necessary to have a functioning society.
And so, what about the rule of never lying, never swearing, never having sex before marriage or getting drunk? Do you like those rules?
Um, so let's.
Do you like those rules? Yes or no?
No, no, I'm not too much of a fan of
Okay,
those rules. Yeah.
there we go. And that's why many people don't want God because he's got those rules.
Okay.
And
Well,
that's what holds people back
I
many
would
times. Oh,
accept. Yeah, I'd be more willing to accept those rules though if I thought that. Like, sure, I do agree. I think you should be polite. I don't think, like, for example, I haven't sworn at you at all in this conversation. Um, right?
Yeah,
And
appreciate that.
um, of course, no sex before marriage. That one, we can talk about that more, but I actually don't think it's a good rule. If you look at, for example, like the amount of teen pregnancies or STDs in like the Bible Belt versus states where they have more sexual education and teach things about like contraceptions, right? There's actually much more harm about teaching only abstinence, right? So I think that there's actually
If
tangible.
people weren't having sex before marriage, you would not have all these sexually transmitted diseases, at least not in the same sort of prevalence. If people were just waiting till marriage and staying faithful to that person for the rest of their life,
Mhm.
you're not going to be having the same prevalence of sexually transmitted diseases.
But it's human nature to have sex without being married per se, right? So I don't think that's something we can stop.
I don't think it's human. Depends what you're meaning by human nature. Just because you may feel a temptation towards the opposite gender doesn't mean you don't exercise self-control. Right?
Of course.
Someone can be married and they may feel still temptation towards the opposite gender of someone else who
Sure.
they're not married to. But you would say they should have self-control and not commit adultery, right?
Well, yeah, I wouldn't. That's not what I'm saying, though, right? I'm not saying that I think everyone should cheat on everyone and we should just promiscuous, sex willy nilly. I'm saying that I don't think people.
So you self-control, right? Self-control is important in that context. Stay
Sure,
faithful to your spouse.
sure, I
Okay.
do. I do
So
agree. Self
then
control is important.
why not self-control to wait till marriage?
Well, what if you're dating somebody for 5 years and you really like them, but you have this rule, both of you, that you're not going to have sex until marriage, and then you get married, and then you find out that you actually sexually aren't really compatible at all. But then you're now in this committed relationship where you have to, um, you've never tried it before, you've never tested it before, and now you're just kind of stuck with it. And wouldn't you
When you
have
enter
rather?
marriage,
Go ahead.
you're making the promise to love this person for better
Sure.
or for worse. It's
Okay.
not as long as you satisfy me how I want you to satisfy. It's nothing like that.
Of course.
It's not. Otherwise, you're entering into it for probably a selfish reason. You're not entering it to actually love them, to care for them, all those sort of reasons. Plus, even if someone had a scenario where they couldn't fulfill that, that's still not a reason for that person to say, "Look, This was a bad mistake. I'm gonna get out of here."
Sure. Sure. Yeah. I mean,
There's even ways of like
I
working through that,
I agree.
but yet still, that's not a failure. That's not a bad thing that's happened. So I just don't see a good reason for why the rule no sex before marriage is bad. If anything, it prevents diseases, it prevents unwanted pregnancies, it prevents a lot of heartache and pain, which comes with breaking up with somebody that you're sexually involved with. It's like a piece of you is left with the other person.
Well,
God wants to
yeah.
spare you this pain and heartache.
If you personally want to have a rule of no sex before marriage, I'm fine with that, of course. But I think if you want to impose that upon everybody, that's where I would not be fine with that. That's the distinction I would make.
Okay, but God is imposing it on everyone. Whether you like it or not, even if you disagree with his rule, he's imposed that rule upon you. That's why maybe potentially you have felt guilty, or many people feel guilty about giving into the various sins. And as a result of that, they want to get rid of the guilt. So, how do they get rid of the guilt? Either they could maybe potentially stop doing the bad actions. But if they don't want to stop doing the bad actions, they just deny the law giver. Because then they
Okay.
can think the law doesn't exist, so they can think they can live life their own way.
Yeah. Like I said, I'm actually married too, by the way. But if I felt that there was a real presence of Jesus and um, God was real, I would gladly accept him. Um, but I don't. It's not that I want to have sex outside of marriage or I wanted to have sex before I got married. I just don't. I can't be convinced of his existence.
Okay. Um, Let me ask you this:
Sure.
If you do, you have any evidence against God? First of all,
Do I have any evidence against God? Um,
like the existence of a creator of the universe.
I don't know that I could give you any evidence that a god or gods don't exist. I think that's
Okay.
pretty hard to do to prove a negative. In the same way
Well,
that,
it's not. It's not. It's not. It's not that hard to prove a negative. There is
well,
definitely ways of being able to prove a negative.
eh,
But yeah, I agree that you agree that. I'm glad that you agree that there's no evidence against the existence of a god or a creator.
sure. I do think though, and I hate to say this because it is kind of a cliched argument, but it does feel like I could ask you the same thing. Is there any evidence against? Could you give me evidence that pixies, don't exist?
Well, I don't make claims about pixies, but I'm. You see, it's only if you make a claim about it, and if you're making a claim
Okay.
God doesn't exist, then you've got a burden of proof you need to satisfy. But you
I need
wouldn't.
to.
Would you say that God doesn't exist, or you just say you're completely not sure, not sure if God exists?
Yeah, so I take the label of agnostic atheist. There's a lot of different ways people, kind of give names for their beliefs and identities and whatnot. But what that means is the atheist part is that I have no belief in God, and the agnostic part is that I don't know whether or not there is a God. If that makes
Okay.
sense.
So, all right. So you're right in the middle, you'd say.
Um, sure.
You'd say there could be a God, or there may not be. You just have absolutely no idea. Is that where you're at right now?
There could be a God. Yeah, I have no idea. But
Okay.
I take the label atheist as well because it's to me, and I'm sorry if this sounds derogatory at all, but it seems like pixies to me. You know what I mean? If I could be proven pixies exist, I would accept them. If I can be proven God exists, I accept them. Like they're
But
the same level
you
in my
can't.
mind.
But you, yeah, it's very different. It's very different, and that's why I don't think you're an atheist. Like if you, well, if you say you don't know, like you've said you're
Okay.
not sure, either God could or couldn't, get rid of the label atheist out of your whatever you call yourself. You're just an agnostic. An atheist is someone who makes the claim that God is not real. You said you're not making that claim. You're just saying you're not sure. So you're just in the category of agnostic. But at the same time, I think you're living as if God doesn't exist.
Why would?
It's not like you're not like living, I don't know, I got to investigate this. You're maybe living, God's not there, so I don't have to worry about these rules and the afterlife and things like that.
Well, you can
When
have rules without
maybe,
God.
oh yeah, you can impose rules, you can have societal rules, things like that, sure.
Yeah.
But they don't have any objective grounding as being objectively right and wrong.
Is it true that you can have bullets in guns, and you can also have guns that have no bullets in them?
Okay, yeah.
But you always have the rule: assume the gun is loaded, right? There's no objective truth that the gun is always loaded, but every responsible person carrying a gun would say, always assume the gun is loaded. That's like a useful fiction, right? A rule you might create to make firearms more safe. In the same way, maybe there's no like literal scientific, like absolute truth to, don't steal, but it benefits us as a society, so that's why we have the rule. I'm at the state where I don't see it necessary
I don't
to. Go ahead, yeah.
I don't see that analogy as necessarily equivalent because you can investigate if someone has a gun and if there's bullets in there,
Sure,
and if the person doesn't have bullets in there, you may say, well, there's no danger, it's fine.
sure.
But with things like going and murdering a child or something like this is not like personal opinion. Just someone thinks it's okay, someone thinks it's wrong. Either way, it doesn't matter. Someone likes chocolate ice cream, someone likes vanilla. It doesn't matter. You have personal preferences. Would you? It is even if someone thinks that it's right to go and murder a child. Would you agree that they're wrong?
Yeah, I don't think murdering children is okay.
Right. And so it
Believe it or not.
transcends personal opinion. Right. So it transcends personal opinion. He thinks it's okay. You think he's wrong. If it's purely personal opinion, then you have no right to say no. You're wrong on that. And because it's just personal opinion, you don't say those who like chocolate ice cream are wrong. You actually say no, murdering children is wrong, and you shouldn't have the opinion that it's right.
So you can give reasons for, like, you could imagine a society that doesn't murder children and a society that does murder children. the society that doesn't murder children would probably get along a lot further without, with that rule in place. So you can give reasonable arguments.
But why does that, just because a society may get along better,
Sure.
why does it make it wrong for a person to do that particular action? Why is society getting along the basis of morality?
Well, because I don't think morality literally exists in the same way I don't think like the number 7 literally exists, right? I think they're like tools we use to understand the world around us better and make our lives better as humans. But I don't think like there's a literal such thing as morality
And so if
that you can like touch and
someone
grab.
thinks that life is better if they were to murder all these other children who may be competitors for the child that they have, life's better for them
Wow.
then. Does that make it
I'd,
better then? Is that good
I'd
for them to
never
do
thought
that?
of that. That's crazy. Um,
Many people
for
think this is not an out there idea. This is honestly what people think. People often don't like their own children, eugenics. They want to have a baby or a child that's like this and not like that, so they wipe out the ones that are not as suited to their lifestyle,
Sure,
maybe even
yeah,
those that have disabilities, and they wipe them out because of that. Would you say that's wrong? Even
and
though they think their life's going to be better without that disabled child?
yeah. So there have been abhorrent things, in human history, doing like what you're talking about, um, and I would still say they're wrong with my moral and ethical framework, right? So, but I still don't think that
Okay,
there's like
so
a
then it's more than
literal.
personal opinion then. Then there needs to be some sort of standard. Otherwise, what are you grounding that in? If you're just grounding in my feelings, well, he says my feelings the opposite. So who's right between you two? You have to
Sure.
have
Oh,
something that's higher than both you and that other person, something that's applicable to all human beings.
for example, I go by a framework called rule utilitarianism, which is uh, basically the idea that one, you want to reduce the suffering for as many humans as possible.
But
Um,
why is that the standard? Why is that the standard as being what's the best? Why does that make the standard of what is right and what is wrong? Who
sure,
do agree that? Because other people would say that's not the standard. So that's again
sure,
just
and
personal subjective opinion. You
I
need
would.
something to ground it in. You don't have anything to ground it in,
There's nothing to ground it in.
and yet you don't live your life that way. You actually say, if you're going to go and murder that child, that is wrong. You should not do that. So you're not living your life as if there's no grounding for morality. You're living your life as if morality is objective,
Yeah, that's why it's a
but you
useful
don't want to admit
fiction.
that.
No, I mean, it's why gun owners, use guns as if they're always loaded, right? That was the reason I made that analogy at the beginning.
If
It's
it's
not
just
a
fiction, why are you saying that someone else is wrong based on your own fiction?
because this life is all we have, and so I want to make it the best possible one I can.
But why is that important on your worldview? Why is life important? Why is someone else's life important on your worldview? I can tell why my worldview life is important because
Why is
we're
that?
image bearers of God. We're image
Okay.
bearers of God. God has made us in his image. We should therefore care for all human life. And that's why we, as Christians, we particularly stand up for all life, including the life of the unborn, because they're human beings. And it's terrible that societies wipe out millions of young people just because they're inconvenient. They're getting in the way of how either the mother or the father wants to live, and so therefore they murder their own child. It's terrible.
Okay.
So Christianity actually provides a
Yeah.
good moral framework, but I think the fact that you live your life as if morality is objective evidences that you're actually just borrowing from the Christian worldview, and you're living as if there is a God in that sense because of morality, but you don't want to admit the moral lawgiver.
Well, I told you I use rule utilitarianism, right, which came from a lot of the Enlightenment thinkers who were staunchly opposed to religion. So I don't think it borrows from Christianity per se.
No, but when you gave your grounding or your framework for ethics, you didn't
Okay.
have anything to base it on. You assume that it's best to prevent human suffering, but why? Why is that best? There's no objective reason why that's best.
Wait, you could point to the fact that
Particularly if it's going to benefit yourself at the expense of others. If you hurt other people, but it benefits you a lot, because less competitors or whatever reason, under that, like some people say that's the better way of living compared to then just reducing suffering for all people. If it's survival of the fittest, why not yourself? Look after yourself more than looking after these other people.
What is it that you can walk, so far as one person, but you can cover much greater distance in a group. Obviously, humans were a super communal species, so it's better to be altruistic, even for your own selfish benefit.
Not necessarily. If they're a competitor, if they're preventing you from being able to succeed better in business or other things, schooling, not having competitors there is actually better for you. So I think there's another reason why you know there's a God. But these rules that God set are a big reason why people don't believe in God. I'd probably argue it's the same for you. And let's say, okay, if Christianity is true, would you become a Christian and follow it?
Like I've been saying, yes.
Okay. And what would you, from your perspective, what would you say is sufficient evidence that would convince you of God?
Any evidence.
That's okay, but I've already given you at least 3 pieces of evidence to show God exists. You haven't refuted a single one of them. So, and yet you were not wanting to change your mind. So obviously not any evidence if I've already given you some and you've still rejected it.
Maybe, I don't know if you've been listening to what I've been saying, but I don't think that, for example, like with morals, right? I don't think that there's such a physical thing as morals, as in, I don't think that there's like literal number 7s floating outside somewhere in the universe, right? They're useful tools we have to understand the world around us. So I feel like you would need to prove to me that there's this literal thing called morals that exist for me to think it's necessary.
I think you know morals exist by the fact that if someone was to murder your own child, you would try and stop them and prevent them from doing that. You know morals exist then.
Right.
You would
morals
say
exist.
It's wrong. Even if the guy thinks I'm doing what I think is morally right, you'd say, you can't do that, you're wrong.
My
You're
position
then
doesn't
acting as if morals are real.
So my position doesn't say that anyone can say what they think and that becomes moral. I do have, like, again, what I would call is like, good and bad, which is based on a rule utilitarian idea. That doesn't mean what other people say becomes like my morals or they make it justified. I just don't think that there's a literal, like for example, if you have a board game, right, and you play Monopoly and you follow the rules of Monopoly, you can obviously know that.
Though.
I think you're missing my point, right?
The Monopoly game, there is an objective standard of what are the rules for that game.
Yeah,
all the participants have rules they must abide by.
But in reality, it's just cardboard and paper, right?
But there's still rules. If you're a participant in the game, you're bound by those rules.
Exactly.
And so if a person wants to murder your child and you're like, don't do that, and he thinks I can do that, he doesn't subscribe to your philosophical framework of morality, and so therefore you would try and stop him from doing that. And yet, why are you stopping him if it's just personal opinion and personal preference? You shouldn't be stopping him. Notice the fact that you would stop him shows that you think it's objectively wrong. It transcends you, beyond you, for someone to do that action, so therefore you'll stop the person from doing that action. You're agreeing that morality exists, objective morality exists, at that point in time.
I don't have to think it's objectively existing for me to want to protect my own child, right? And furthermore, I don't think I would need to be like divinely commanded to do that, to have that be my natural instinct.
But if it's just subjective, what right do you have then to stop that person from doing something that he thinks is subjectively right?
Right, just therefore, as much as right.
You must think it's objective. You must think there's some sort of objective morality that, even though he thinks it's right, he shouldn't be doing it. So I'm going to stop him.
Because I think it's
acting as if it's objective.
Because I think it's subjective, and I do stop him. I don't think that makes it any more difference in me not stopping him. You know what I mean? I don't think that bears any more or less.
I'm not sure if you're seeing the distinction. So, if you think it's did you say if you think it's objective? Did you say?
Well, you said because I'm stopping somebody, that means intuitively, like, I think it's objective anyway.
Yes.
That seems like a non sequitur. Like, why does that
No,
matter if I think
because
it's objective or
subjective
not?
only relates to yourself, just your own personal opinion, right?
Okay,
And so
so
therefore, if the other person thinks it's right, you think it's wrong, you would say, no, you can't do that. He says, yes, I can. And he
I
says,
see.
he proceeds to go and do this. You then thinking, no, I should be able to stop you. You think it's beyond your subjective experience. You now think it's something more transcendent to yourself. It's beyond you. You therefore think it's objective. But I'll leave that to the side for now. You haven't been able to refute also the fact that we know the universe had a beginning. You haven't been able to refute even the complexity of the universe. We haven't really gone into detail on that, but there's much fine-tuning of the universe right from its origin. So you've got no evidence against God's existence. You've been presented with at least 3 reasons, and we can go into more detail of that, and you can research more on that, about why it makes sense there would be a God. And so if you truly were neutral, let's say you were right in the middle, I'm not sure either way, yes or no, the fact that you've got no evidence against, but you've got at least some evidence for, should at the very least push you over to the one side and say, all right, it's more reasonable to say that he does exist than that he doesn't. If you've got some positive evidence for, even if you don't think it gets to 100% certainty, that's fine. You shouldn't be staying then right in the middle. You should be going over to the area where there's more evidence for compared to the fact there's no evidence against. Does that make sense?
I don't think I've been presented with reasonable arguments, so I'm not going to be moved over.
You have yet to refute a single argument. I brought up the universe had a beginning. Everything that has a beginning has a cause. Therefore, the universe has a cause for its beginning. That is a sound argument. You agreed the premises are shown to be true. Therefore, the conclusion logically follows. You've yet to refute a single argument. To me, it shows you're not interested in truth, my friend.
I
You're
actually
not.
am exactly interested in truth. That's why I say honestly, I would love to accept Christianity if I think it is true.
And
That's
yet,
why
I've
I
given you a sound
deconverted.
argument. You've not yet refuted a single of the arguments that brought up.
I can tell you again, space and time began with the Big Bang. So how could you have before time?
That's not a refuting of the argument. You'd
It's a
have to show
refutation.
that either.
You're saying that something has to be outside of time to create it. I'm saying time started with the Big Bang. So how can you have something before or outside of that? It doesn't make sense.
Why could you not have something outside of time and space?
Oh, and then I could just say, why is there not, like a floating teapot behind
But
Mars,
in
right?
order for you, I'm not making there may be a flying teapot over Mars or whatever.
Okay.
That's possible, but that's not what we're talking about. I'm not making a claim about teapots. I've made a sound logical argument. You've tried to counter it with something that doesn't even counter the argument. I've tried to get you to, can you support your argument? You haven't got anything to support it. Again, evidencing you're not interested in truth.
I again, I don't want to accept anything that is not logically sound to me. And just because you claim something doesn't mean it becomes an argument. You know what I mean?
If it's not logically sound, show me a flaw in the argument, the 2 premises and the conclusion. Because it logically follows. If you've studied logic, those 2 premises lead to that conclusion necessarily.
The universe began with space and time, and so you can't have a before time. It's like asking what's north of the North Pole.
Why? Well, hold up. Before, can you have something causally before?
I don't. Yeah, and I asked you to give me an example
I'm
of
just asking, can
something.
you? I'm just like, can you have something?
I don't know.
Because are you
Can you
making
have
the
pixies?
okay? Well then therefore, why are you limiting it to only temporarily before but not causally before?
I don't know what causally before but not temporally before, how what that means.
Okay,
It's not something
I'll
I've
let
ever
you think
observed.
about that. I would let you think about that, but your objection doesn't counter anything that we've talked about. It's an argument that atheists have brought up before, but it's never been a strong one. I'm surprised you actually bring it up. But I don't want to necessarily go back over this because I don't actually think you're wanting to change your mind. So I won't stick on this topic because I don't think it'd be that fruitful. I think
Okay.
what needs to happen is, you need to check what's holding you back. What is the love, which sins you wanting to hold on to that's causing you to be so against the idea of God. But I want to ask
Yeah.
you, what your understanding of Christianity, what do you think is the message that Christians teach, or Christianity teaches, is the way to go to heaven?
Okay. I'm not going to be able to accept the framework that I'm just holding on to sins, and that's why I don't believe in Christianity. I literally do want to search for
You
truth.
aren't
That's
down
why
for those rules. I asked you. You're not down for those rules. That's why I asked you. And so you.
well, that's for pragmatic reasons, right? Because again, you can't just tell everybody to stop having sex before marriage. It's more so that if you have that rule, then you blind yourself to see the actual like evidence and effects that transpire, right? You're not going to be able to stop everybody from having sex before marriage. And humans existed long before the institution of marriage even existed, right? So how would those rules be relevant then, for example?
So what do you think is the message Christians teach or Christianity teaches is the way to go to heaven?
What? Yeah. So as I understood it, when I was a Christian, it was you get grace through God, through faith in having the gift of grace from Jesus who died on the cross and atoned for your sins. Because everyone has sins, everyone's born with sins.
And how do you receive that? How do you receive that?
You receive it through faith.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's not based on good works.
Sure.
It's not based on how many times you pray or go to church or things like that. It's based on trusting in his sacrifice, that we should be in hell, but he took the punishment for us on the cross. So would you say, if you were to grant God's existence, would you say that you deserve to be sent to hell for all of your sins?
What God's existence?
No, what I'm saying is that would you deserve to be sent to hell for your sins?
So if we want to presume God exists, should I go to hell?
Sure. Yeah. Do you think that you would deserve hell for your sins?
Why should I go to eternal damnation for, a set amount of finite things that I've committed? You know what I mean?
Because you've sinned against an eternal God. You deserve his eternal wrath. Doesn't mean everyone in hell gets the same punishment. There's different degrees of punishment in hell the Bible speaks about. Some sins are worse than others. But it's not about the time length, how long it took you to sin. It's about the severity of it. And if God considers your sins to be very severe, it makes sense that he sets the punishment to be that severe.
Yeah, so
But
that's...
you would say you still don't think you deserve it.
Well, I mean, you think I deserve it, as does Christianity, right?
Yeah.
But again, why would I even accept...
That's also another reason. That's also another reason why people reject, is because of a high view of self. If we have a high view of self, we don't want to accept the idea that we're guilty and bad and should be in hell forever for our sins. Right? And so that's why my encouragement is just reflect on how evil you've been. I've been very evil as well. Every lustful thought you've ever thought of, God considers that to be adultery at your heart, to even think those thoughts. Hatred is like murder. And he's going to see all these things, even the secret things you thought that nobody else knew about. God knows about it. He'll bring it up on Judgment Day. And it's going to be that eternal wrath that we deserve. So reflect on that for yourself, because if you stand before God and you've been like, God, I didn't believe in you, like, you won't have an excuse.
Why should I don't... It's not that I'm choosing not to believe in him. I just can't be convinced of his existence. I would accept the paradigm that Christianity teaches, that I would need to, submit to Jesus. I just... Like, you wouldn't believe in some other religion's laws. Like, you wouldn't believe in whatever Hinduism laws or commands you, do you?
Maybe if there's some overlap, there probably is a lot of overlap between all the various religions.
But if there's something like completely,
don't steal,
completely unique to Hinduism that's not in Christianity, you wouldn't follow those laws, right? Yeah, and because you don't think Hinduism is true.
Yeah, I agree.
I don't think the Christian God is true.
It's just that you don't have a reason to. I've got a reason for why I can know the Hindu God and the Muslim God and so on are not true, but you don't have a reason why the Christian God's not true. You're basically saying, I just don't know. You haven't looked into it. You haven't even really, have you read any books that are set out to prove the existence of God?
So, like I mentioned at the beginning, I was raised Christian during the basic beginning of my life. Right?
I'm not talking about the Bible. I'm talking about, have you read any books written by philosophers, apologists, historians that are set out just to prove the existence of God?
I've read into books about, apologia, about, the existence of God. It's a question that I'm constantly asking because I am someone who does really care about truth and wanting to know more about the universe.
Okay. But you said you just can't. You're presented with evidence, but you're like, I don't want to accept the evidence.
Well, I don't think it's good evidence, so that's why I'm not accepting it.
Okay, but hold up. I said, what evidence would you need to believe in God? And you're like, any evidence.
Yeah.
Okay, well, you've been presented with evidence, and you haven't shown any flaws in it. Then what actual evidence would you need? Like, tell me what you'd need. Would you need God to appear before you? What would you need?
Probably, yeah. I mean, any evidence. Okay, good evidence or evidence semantics.
Why would you require God to appear? Why would you require God to appear to you?
Wouldn't that
You
be
don't
a
require
reasonable
that for-
request for a two-way relationship?
No,
No?
no. Like,
You would get catfished.
if you want to know
pretty
about the
soon.
existence, you want to know the existence of someone. Like,
Yeah.
I don't need them to appear before me. I don't need Alexander the Great to appear before me for me to believe that he's real.
Well, that's a pretty different. For some other human to exist and you accepting that claim is a pretty different one than, an alleged divine, omnipresent, omnipotent.
And so why would you require
creator
them,
of
the
the world.
divine being, to appear before you? You haven't given a reason for that.
Because there's no reason to accept him, right? There's no evidence.
How do you know there's no evidence?
How do you know there's no evidence of pixies?
Sorry, say it again.
How do you know there's no evidence of pixies, but you reject pixies, right?
But you make the assertion that there's no evidence for God.
What
But
evidence
that's actually
is there?
that's quite a bold claim. Do you realize that? In
I
order
mean,
for you
if
to
you have
claim there's
evidence,
no
please share
evidence
it
for
with me.
God, if you were to claim from a rational point of view there's no evidence for God, you would need to know, you would
Oh,
have
I
need
see
to
what
read, like every book that's ever been written on this subject. You would need to interview and chat to every single person to see if they've got evidence to make the assertion that there's no evidence for God, and yet you haven't done that. Probably even haven't read half the books that have been read on this subject.
Sure,
written
I'm
on this
sure I
subject.
could read a lot more
So
books.
how can you rationally make the claim there's no evidence?
How can you be sure that you've read enough books on any other god or any other proposition? Does it need to be the fact that you've read everything possible to reject something?
If you're making the assertion, yes, that there's no evidence of something, that something does not exist, or there's no evidence for that, then yes, you would need to know like everything there is about that entire subject matter to make that assertion.
So you must
Like
believe
if I was to say,
yeah.
if I was to say that there's no one living in my city who's over the age of 100 right now, I would have to then know the ages of every single person in my city
Sure.
to make that claim. And yeah, therefore, if I don't know that, I'm not going to say that there's no one in my city that's over 100.
But that's something you can
And
test.
so in the same way, you should not be making the assertion, which so many atheists do, and you've probably learned from their mantra of all these atheists who make this absurd assertion, there's no evidence for God. It's honestly an absurd assertion, and they keep repeating it, and then they start believing it because they repeat it so often. And then they start asserting. And I think that's what you've done. You're asserting something that you've maybe heard or you've thought, but there's no grounding to say that there's no evidence for God.
I mean, right now you're saying that because I haven't been able to read or observe every potential piece of evidence, that it's not reasonable for me to reject the existence of God. But I could do the same thing for, have you read every Irish history book or Celtic folklore on the existence of leprechauns? Right? It's unreasonable for you to deny their existence.
I don't make claims about leprechauns. I'm not talking
But
about that. I'm talking about
do you
God.
believe leprechauns exist?
I don't make any claim about leprechauns.
If I could show you some evidence for
See, that's the
leprechauns to
difference.
exist, would
That's
you
the
believe in them?
difference. That's the difference. Is that you're wanting to be like, God? No, I don't want him. So I want to make the assertion that God's not real, even though I haven't done much thorough research on it. But about leprechauns, I don't make any assertion about them. Could or couldn't exist, it doesn't really matter to me. But I'm not going to make assertions that there's no evidence for leprechauns.
But if I
you're
pressed
making
you on
the
it,
assertion there's no evidence for God. You're
If I
making the
press-
assertion there's no evidence for God. If you were a rational person, you would say you would not make the assertion there's no evidence for God. you would say, I'm not sure at this point. I've done
I
a
don't think
tiny
I've
bit of
even.
research. Done a tiny bit of research out of the thorough amount of research I could look at. And you might say from the tiny, tiny bit of research I've done, I couldn't find any, but that's not a good thing to assert, oh, there's no evidence for God. Are you willing to back down from that claim?
I don't know if I even. I mean, I'd be happy to go over the recording of this, and I don't even know if I said there's no evidence for God. I just think I
You
said I
did.
haven't been presented.
You-
Okay, that I haven't been
You did.
presented with evidence for God. And then I
Okay.
think it's also a bit. I
And
would
what do you
prefer if
use
you.
to judge what is good evidence or not? Because then you also got that problem. So I think in this conversation you have been presented,
If it's
but
testable,
then what do you use to
yeah.
determine
If you can test
what
it,
is good evidence or not? Test in what sense?
test in a logical sense or test in a physical sense.
Okay, so if it's a logical sound arguments with its premises being true, would that be good evidence?
It could be. What kind of
Hold up.
argument do you
Why?
have?
Okay. Why would it only could be? Why would it not be yes? That is, if it's logical argument, premises are true. Why would that not be good evidence?
Okay, in a abstract sense, sure, yes, it would be, but I've heard that said
Okay.
used in a way that's misleading, right? Like you could say it's sound that there could be somebody born in New York who got bitten by a spider. New York's a real place. People get born in New York. There are spiders, right? Um, would you say then it's a sound argument that Spider-Man existed?
Well, that didn't logically follow. That wasn't a sound argument.
And then to me, it's not a sound argument
No,
for
no,
the
no,
truth
no.
of Christianity, right? I mean,
The
tell me if you have some, then please let me know.
I'm not sure if you've studied logic or not, but that conclusion of Spider-Man did not come from those two premises that you
Well,
said just now.
sure,
So
I
that is
glossed over a
terrible.
lot,
That's a
but
terrible example. The
my
argument I gave to you, it's two
okay.
sound premises. The conclusion logically follows. And you're like, I don't like the conclusion, but I agree with the premises. Well, if it's a
I
sound argument, there's no logical fallacies, then you must accept the conclusion. If you want to be rational, if you want to be a closed-minded, like irrational person, that's up to you. But I just hope that this conversation is going to get you to think about, why am I always rejecting the evidence? The evidence is presented, but why am I always rejecting it? There must be some sort of ulterior motive behind. Why do I not want there to be a God who sets these sort of rules?
maybe
And so I'm gonna leave it at that, because there's a few other people that want to have a conversation. But
okay.
I hope that you're going to think about this, man. We care about you. I'll be praying for you. But ultimately, you stop suppressing the truth you know about God. Realize you're a sinner, that you've done wrong, but then put your trust in Jesus, that He's taken the punishment for all your sins. Thanks for the
Okay.
chat, man. It's been good talking
Thanks
to
for
you.
talking. Please don't strawman me in the future.
Heavenly Father, we do thank you for that